It kind of freaked out there for a second. You saw that? It lost its mind for just a second.
Well, it's in good company.
It's technology, and it's taking over the world with the AI revolution. Anyways, before we get started with all that, Bo, this is, according to the little logo that is up in the corner here, Market Garden 80 here on Homebrew History. This is this will be the, I was trying to walk myself through this morning. This is the first episode that we're recording, but it will be the last one that you will hear,
Yes.
Dear listener, on the commemoration of Market Garden's 80th anniversary, 80 years on, starting really September 17th. So we're recording this, on the 2nd? So we've got a few weeks kind of build up. We've got a couple of other episodes we're going to get recorded between now and then, but this is part of a whole series that we'll be putting out from about the 17th right up through, I think I'm going to do it through the end of the month. I think that's a good way to kind of end things.
And it's kind of funny because this episode is going to really revolve around the memory of Market Garden, but we're starting it early so we don't forget Market Garden, right?
That's yeah. This is a mind game, really, is what it is. Anyways, we're going to be joined on today's episode, this day's episode, by Joe Hook, who is a historian, military historian, a battlefield guide. But first, just a little bit about her. She is the daughter of a Second World War soldier. She had joined the Territorial Army and the Signal Corps. And that's when she really began to study Market Garden, was while she was posted to Germany. And since then, she has conducted numerous virtual and live battlefield tours. And today, she is joining us on Homebrew History. Joe, it is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And so we said how you got into Market Garden, but how did you really? I mean, it's not like you're just sitting in Germany and you said, you know what? William F. Buckingham's billion-page book looks like a great place to start. How did you get really interested in it?
So I was already guiding for a particular company, and my then husband and I got posted to Germany. And that particular company, it was when we had quite a lot of military established in Germany. A lot of them have moved out now, but there were a lot of military units in Germany at the time. And that particular company said to me, Joe, you're going to Germany. We need a guide who is embedded in, because it's more cost effective to have somebody in Germany to take military units out to study Market Garden. And I'll be totally honest with you. First of all, I said, I don't really want to do that. For two reasons. The first reason, it is quite, when you compare it to, say, Normandy or some of the more well-known battlefields, it is quite niche. Mm-hmm. And secondly, certainly here in England, it is very, I'm going to use a word here that's not in the dictionary. It's very paratastic. So parachute regiment.
Yeah.
I'm a female. I'm ex-Royal Signals, both of which are not advantageous when you're guiding people who are ex-parachute regiment. So I didn't initially want to do it, but I said, yeah, okay, fine, because it was really, I wanted to diversify in my guiding. And therefore, living in Germany, I was 2 hours from the border. I went over every weekend, walked the ground, and gradually I started to think, gosh, this is an amazing story. It's a complete battle of what ifs. It's a battle of tenacity, courage, not only by the airborne troops, but by the ground troops who landed in gliders, by the Dutch. We kind of forget, the Dutch were still there when these men dropped. Mm-hmm. And the story is just such a fascinating story, and a story of what ifs. And it's still today, some 20 years later, touches my soul. And that's how it started.
So it's one of those things, Joe, what are those what ifs? And can you give us sort of a little bit of background into Market Gardens for some of our listeners who may not be up to snuff, so to speak?
Yeah, sure. How long have you got till midnight? Not.
Right. Give us a brief overview of Market Garden. We'll see you in 24 hours.
So basically, end of June 1944, British and Americans landed on the 5 beaches of Omaha. And Montgomery, who commands the land forces, predicts that we'll be in Paris in 90 days. And he very nearly hit it spot on. We are crossing the Seine mid-August, mid to late August, pushing a German army that we believe is have virtually capitulated. But as we're pushing further and further north and east, our supplies are still coming in via the coast, Cherbourg and the One Mulberry Harbour. So that supply line is becoming more and more elasticated. And that's causing problems because the Supreme Headquarters Allied Commander, Dwight D. Eisenhower, first of all, he wants to push forward on a broad front using Americans, British, and the Canadians. Let's not forget the Canadians, all on a broad thrust into sort of north and eastwards. He can't do that, though, because he hasn't got the supplies to be able to do it. And to cut a very long story short, Montgomery comes up with a plan, and his plan is to drop a carpet of airborne troops. It's more like a system of rugs as opposed to an elongated carpet, but a carpet of airborne troops who will capture bridges across vital waterways from the Dutch-Belgian border all the way 64 miles to Arnhem. The idea is that once those bridges have been captured, ground troops, predominantly 30 Corps, but you have got 2 corps either side of 30 Corps, are going to push north and then head east into the industrial heartland of the Ruhr in the hope that we're going to end the war by Christmas. And that is the plan. And what is being fed back via intelligence from different sources is that the German army are virtually all but, destroyed, capitulated. And that we keep receiving that information till the beginning of, till about the 5th of September. 5th of September is known as Dolze Dinsdag, Mad Tuesday, where the resistance, everything is reporting back, the German army have finished. But after the 5th of September, the German army start to slow down and they start to reorganize and start to regroup. And by that stage, airborne troops, certainly for the first British airborne troops, they have been stood up for something like 16 operations, all of which have been cancelled because of the speed with which we capture the ground by our ground troops. There is also we have to look at the political angle of it. There is also there's let's say a priority to use the 1st Airborne Division for the British. This is a division that's never fought as a division on its own, and there's been lots of money going into training these men. This division needs to be used, so there is a kind of thinking we need to use that division, 1st Airborne Division, who will land at Arnhem. But this comes on the back of various different operations, as I said, that have been cancelled. The last operation starts the planning phase today, 80 years ago, and that's Operation Comet. And Operation Comet is virtually exactly the same as Market Garden, but using just the 1st British Airborne Division together with the Polish Brigade. That is then expanded to incorporate 2 more divisions, the 101st and 82nd Airborne Division. And Comet is cancelled. I think Comet is cancelled on the 10th of September. And then with the orders that Market Garden must go ahead, but they only have 7 days to plan that newly expanded operation, which will be Market Garden. And that, in a nutshell, very quickly, is it. There's lots of other things that come into the picture, but basically that is the plan.
So I kind of want to jump. We just did the introduction and the overview, and if you haven't listened to the last couple of episodes, well, now's your chance. But now I want to jump, spoiler alert, to the end, because what we want to talk about today primarily is the aftermath and then the last, say, 80 years of really remembering and memorializing the operation. So fast forward, the British and the American effort ultimately falls short. You know, it's a bridge too far, all that stuff, right? 90% effective. What happens in Holland and Nijmegen and Grava after the Ally withdrawal from Arnhem, and then eventually that broad push to take the Scheldt and then to try and push again? What happens in the Netherlands during that time?
Yeah, so after Market Garden, and so first of all, I think I want a bit. Can I bust a quick myth very quickly myself?
Yeah.
Montgomery says that Market Garden is 90% successful. Well, I would go ahead, it's 75% successful, because at the end of Market Garden, if you're Dutch and you live south of Nijmegen, or if you live in Eindhoven, you're liberated.
Yeah.
Everything north of Nijmegen, i.e. Arnhem, Arnhem becomes frontline. So from that point of view, for the British, and I'm a British person, I look at it from predominantly a British perspective, because it's British people I take on the battlefields, although yesterday I was guiding Americans. But predominantly we look at it from a British perspective, and the British perspective for Arnhem doesn't achieve its objective. We capture the bridge. Yes, the second parachute battalion do achieve its objective, but the meet up with the paras, with the 30 Corps and the ground troop, that is not achieved. So from that perspective, it's not successful. But anything, as I said, south of Nijmegen, if you live in Nijmegen, south here in Eindhoven, where I'm sitting now, is liberated. You know, by the 25th, 26th September, that is completely liberated. So that's a myth I'm going to bust when everybody says, oh, Operation Market Garden failed. Well, the top end did. And 75%, 82nd, 101st Airborne Division, you know, it achieves what it set out to do. There's lots of, you know, whys and wherefores, which I'm not going to go into now. After Market Garden, certainly for the people, the Dutch in Arnhem, they are evacuated, and their properties are systematically looted. A very good friend of mine, who I mentioned actually on a social media platform this week, her name was Bill Reichen, I used to call her name was Wilhelmina, but that's the female version of William, so I used to call her Bill. And she told me, she said, our house was looted. We were evacuated, it was looted, and the Germans, the SS, literally brought in trains with carriages with lettering on them that said, so for example, cutlery, plates, linen, and they looted for absolutely everything. And because of the Dutch help, the resistance, on the 17th of September, so the start of Market Garden, the Dutch National Railways go on strike in an effort to support the operation. And there's a whole load of resistance takes place as soon as the airborne drops start happening and the ground starts to be captured by the British. And as a reprisal to that, the Germans starve the Dutch in the Netherlands. And anywhere north of Arnhem goes through the worst winter of the war for them as a population, because they are completely starved. I think it's something like 10,000 Dutch will die of starvation. It's an awful, awful thing where people are, you know, for example, my partner's grandmother walked something like 10 kilometers from her village to buy one potato because she was starving. And she was certainly, she thought she was going to die. That is finally in the spring of 1945, you have the two big airlifts, first humanitarian airlifts ever, by American forces known as Operation Chowhound, by British forces, Air Force known as Operation Manna, but also by the Canadians. The Canadians bringing something like, I think it's 30,000 tons of supplies in order to feed the starving Dutch people. So for those people, they go through a really hard time until eventually, April 1945, we're looking at the end of the war. But anywhere south of Nijmegen, effectively, they come under British and American control, so they're liberated. Life is still difficult. It's not completely easy, but they have the freedom of knowing that they're living, not under the jackboot of the Nazis anymore. And so that's what's happening in the Netherlands after Market Garden.
It's one of those things that it brings a level of, personality to Market Garden. And you have a very unique experience. Your friends do, as well. And you kind of already answered this, but I want to ask it anyway, because it is sort of still a question that's kind of unique to me. Do different nationalities sort of have a different memory of Market Garden?
Yes, well, that's a really good question. It's one I've never thought of, to be honest. Certainly for the Dutch, Market Garden created a bond stronger than you see in any other country, I think, personally. And I guide in France, I guide in Belgium. So I'll give you, for example, today we've just been wrecking down on the 101st Airborne Division sector. And already the villages, we were down at Valkenswaard, we went up through Zonbridge, and then up through the drop and landing zones of the 101st Airborne Division, all the way up almost to Vechel, through St. Oden Road, and all the villages are starting to prepare for commemorations. We were up at Arnhem yesterday. There was more houses with Pegasus, so the 1st British Airborne Division flags, than I've seen. And certainly I've got a private tour going up over the commemorations. The Friends of the Airborne Museum, together with the Arnhem Fellowship, have been for months now sending us out information about what roads are going to be closed and what commemorations are taking place. So you can see it starting now, and we're 2 weeks out of commemoration. People are starting to build up to it. So there's a real strong bond with the Dutch, the British, and the Americans. I think because of the distance, you don't necessarily see so many Americans come over here. Although I think for the 80th, you're going to see a huge influx of them. But for the British, I think the British psyche, to be honest, goes more towards Normandy, because that seems to be the more popular battlefield. Like I said earlier, Market Garden seems to be more niche. You get far more, me as a guide, I get far more requests to go to Normandy than I do to Market Garden, which annoys me intensely, because Market Garden is my favourite. So I think that you do. I think certainly for the British and the Americans, it's not so much they don't remember it. It's the distance to travel to be here, and the cost. For the British, it's less of a distance, less of a cost than if you're, say, American.
Yeah, I know the only way that I got to get to Arnhem and Nijmegen was on a group tour that started in Normandy and then worked its way, all the way to its end in Munich. But like it was 2 days, where Normandy got 4 days, Market Garden got 2 days kind of sandwiched right in the middle. The Battle of the Bulge got 3 days, and then Germany got 3 days. And it's like, okay, I guess we'll just reduce the largest airborne operation. No, okay, fine. All right, whatever.
And 2 days is really, if you want to, you get a lot of British that will focus solely on 1st Airborne Division. And from my perspective, I think you have to know it all. You have to know. So I will do the 1st Airborne Division, but I would prefer, and the tour I'm doing over commemorations is we're coming right up from, Leopoldsburg, where you see Horrocks making his speech. Gentlemen, this is a story you'll tell your grandchildren. We come up all the way through the 101st sector, all the way up through 82nd Airborne Division, and we'll be up in Arnhem on our last day. I may have to juggle things because of the commemoration taking place. But the beauty of that is, as a guide, there's certain points you can stand at, specifically when you're in Arnhem, and you can look back at Nijmegen and say, okay, that's how close they got. You can see it from here. So, and that certainly gives people an introduction and a real lead up, because you can still find pieces of Howells Highway there if you know where to look. And so we were on it this afternoon, on and off it this afternoon, which is great because you just see, and it gives you that idea of how actually narrow that highway was, really narrow. So I hope that's answered your question.
Yeah, that's a great. I mean,
Yeah,
way to go, Bo.
yeah. Do what I can. It's a rarity. A broken clock is right twice a day. Joe, something that we do talk about on the show a lot is the importance of walking the ground, and to actually put yourself, theoretically in the shoes of those who came before us. How important is that to Market Garden and to its memorization?
I think it's so important. It's extremely important. If you just stand on the banks of the Vaal, for example, where the 82nd Airborne Division or the 504th do their major crossing in the boats, 400 meters, that it's the widest river in the Netherlands. And then once they hit the sandbanks on the northern side, you've got another 500 meters to go. To actually just stand there, we were stood there yesterday afternoon. You can get an idea of the current, the flow of the current on the river, and you just see from there how far, where the 82nd 504th make that crossing, is still quite a distance from the northern end of the main Nijmegen road bridge. And it's not until you're on the ground that you actually understand that, and you think, okay, now I understand why it was so difficult. And as I said before, you can stand at a place called the Belvedere Tower, which overlooks the end of the Nijmegen Bridge. You see this vast bridge. You can go up to the 1st Airborne Division sector, and we go to a specific place called the Vesterboving Heights. Now, the Vesterboving Heights, during the battle, was first captured, or the first troops that were there were from the 1st Airborne Division, the 1st Border Regiment. The German army, though, and I think it's von Tettau, Camp Group of von Tettau, know how important that position is because it's the only bit of high ground up at Oosterbeek and it overlooks the Lower Rhine. And from there you can see Nijmegen. And so I always go up there and I say to everybody, because we'll have come up from Nijmegen and we'll have stood looking at the Vaal Bridge, I'll say, okay, that's where they got. Look how far it is. Look at the distance. It's not that far. And virtually everybody I take on a battlefield, whether they be, Australians on the First World War, people at Normandy, Market Garden, say, we've read the books, but it's not until you get on the ground that you just you just get it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's vitally important. And the beauty we have with the Second World War is we have so much more imagery, So I love a then and now. So I love going on the battlefield and standing in a place and go, right, okay, this was taken here. This is where we stood now. And you'll get people, oh, can I take a photograph of that? Yeah, sure, of course you can. And then they take a photograph of the actual building as it is today. We also use a lot of the war correspondent stuff. So yesterday we were stood up on the drop zones playing Ed Murrow. I think Ed Murrow he was a war correspondent. Mm-hmm. I think he went in with 101st. I may be wrong. Somebody might correct me on that. But it's one of the American divisions. And we play the BBC soundbite of him talking about the men leaving the aircraft. And you can hear the snap as the parachutes open. And just to stand up there and listen to that is just amazing. So we do a lot of that, sound bites and then and out. It gives that added, I think, advantage than just standing there listening to one voice all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So
that actually is a great point because, Bo, I live in the Civil War world of guiding and touring, and there aren't a lot of great then and nows of some Civil War battlefields. I mean, the big famous ones, naturally, you can pull up like the Dead at Antietam and the Sunken Road and oh, that's the place. But generally speaking, you can't do that. So you do have to kind of rely on, the spoken word of the tour guide and then the personal accounts of the soldiers.
And a bit of imagination.
Yeah.
But now that I'm working on this research about the 1946 stuff, I'm like, oh my God, I can do a then and now picture in this book. This is amazing.
Yeah, and that leads you down various rabbit holes, especially when you're up there on the grounds. And it's been really strange today because we've been coming up through Valkenswaard doing a lot of 101st recce stuff. And as you come up the road, the Dutch have got these huge, almost like, you see the advertising hoardings at the side of the road, advertising, I don't know what, as you're driving along. They've got stuff like this as you come up the corridor with photographs of the time 1944, and the amount of times we've been on a time scale today because I wanted to speak to you guys. The amount of times we've wanted to pull the car over and go, we'll just take a picture of that and then you can use that on the tour, but we haven't been able to, but that's fine. Yes, we are very lucky, those of us that guide the Second World War, because we have far more media of the day and of the time than even the First World War.
Yeah, you start talking about having radio recordings. Like, man,
yeah,
if only. Anyhow, so with the battle effectively over, and then eventually the Allies are able to push through the Germans, and they retreat into Germany. Of course, we know how the war comes to an end. At some point, the dead are buried, and the cemeteries are formed, and the War Graves Commission shows up and starts to mark graves more officially. What does that process look like? And how does it begin? And then certainly, how are the Dutch civilians involved in that as well? Because they're trying to rebuild their homes while at the same time there's efforts to bury the dead and move on with the war.
So certainly for the British, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, when it first started, was after the Great War. So they're already pretty much established after the Great War. And I suppose the Second World War comes along and they just think, okay, we've got to do that whole process over again for burying our dead of the Second World War. And there's quite a few. So they do exactly the same, really, as with the Second World War as they do with the First World War, i.e. there's lots of little graves, little men that have been buried hurriedly during the battle. So I can think of, for example, a big one, if you hark back to the film A Bridge Too Far, is the Kate to Horst house. Now, there is 57 soldiers that were buried in her garden. So she has to come back to her house and they have to be exhumed. And for all those soldiers in Arnhem, or the majority of them that fought in Arnhem, they're buried at the Commonwealth War Graves Cemetery at Oosterbeek, which we call is known as a collection cemetery, basically because it does what it says on the tin. Bodies are exhumed, collected in one main cemetery. There's a few at Jonkerbos, which is after the battle. Some of those who managed to escape, or some of those who managed to cross back over to the south, cross the Rhine at the end after Operation Berlin. But some of them are drowned and their bodies are washed up further on down the Rhine. I know of at least 2-3 paramen who are taken to a cemetery called Jonkerbos. So basically, that is what happens for the British. And I would think, although I'm not 100% sure on the Americans, there's a lot of Americans that are buried at Margraten Cemetery, but for the Americans also, they've started making their cemeteries for those who don't want to be repatriated. Now, America did have the policy that you could be repatriated, whereas British and Commonwealth troops, we don't have that policy. We can't repatriate. America, slightly different, you can. And after the Great War, some did. But there are Great War cemeteries for the Americans. So like down at places like Meuse-Argonne, even one up at Ypres in Flanders. And I would have thought that the same policy prevailed after the Second World War as well. But for the Dutch people, certainly up in Arnhem, they start commemorating very, very early. So they start as early as 1946, a year after the war. And it starts with the local people commemorating, and especially taking the children, the flower children, they call them. And that is very specific to Operation Market Garden, and especially up at Arnhem. Ever since 1946, on the commemoration weekend, we have the commemorations and the veterans were coming back. even up to, I don't know if we've got any more Arnhem veterans left now for the 80th, but certainly on the 75th, we did have Arnhem veterans coming back, and they all come back. The various associations will be up there. I think the Dutch royal family will be up there. I don't know if the King's coming out. I'm not sure the King for the UK, King Charles. I'm not sure what's happening. But it's specifically, you have the service, and then the children, the local children, will find a grave or will research a grave, and then will place their flowers on there. And in the Netherlands here, they have got a fantastic project. Again, we were only talking about it yesterday, whereby you can apply to adopt a grave. And this is specifically for the Americans. And it might be somebody who was killed in your village where you came from, or it might be somebody who your father had adopted previously. And traditionally, it's handed on through the family. You take your children, they take their children. And so my partner Ed adopts 2 graves of Americans. And it's basically for the Americans, it's because a lot of Americans can't get to the graves. And so the Dutch will adopt them, and they'll be in contact with the family. And throughout the year, every time they go up there, they'll let the family know they've visited that particular serviceman or servicewoman, although they're very few, just to let them know I've taken some flowers up there. And this project has grown and grown and grown. So, for example, Ed, my partner, he adopts 2. There's a 3rd that he's been waiting to adopt. And such is the enthusiasm of the Dutch that there is a 9-year waiting list to adopt headstones.
I was going to ask is what's the kind of attention that's given to it by the Dutch civilian population? How involved in it are they? Yeah.
Huge attention. So the Flower Children starts in 1946, and that will still go on. There will be children that lay their flowers at the headstones of the servicemen. But just in the last, I would say it's last 10 years, it might have been a little bit more. They've also started a tradition whereby on Christmas Eve, they start to light candles, and they take larger candles to all the headstones in the cemeteries. And I can't remember the guy who started that. I think it was a Dutchman. It might have been an American. So correct me if I'm wrong. And he said, Christmas is a time for families. And at that special time when you should be your family, these men should not be on their own. So this tradition of placing a candle on the headstones at Christmas time has also been grown and grown and grown over the years. But it all starts in 1946 with the Flower Children.
That's pretty awesome.
That's great. How has the sort of the process of memorializing changed from that point to today? And then I almost want to throw this in there. How much has popular culture influenced that? Because of course there's the 2 films, right? There's Is the Glory, and then A Bridge Too Far. And A Bridge Too Far has its own like cult following all by itself. I mean, you don't get stickers like Bring Up the Piet, which you can order from Homebrew History online. Just send us an email or drop us a comment in there. And then 2, I was really fortunate to go to We Have Ways Fest this year, and Robbie McGuire and Matt Moss gave me this incredible shirt, which is a recreation of the crew t-shirts for Bridge Too Far. Yeah. So it clearly, even if it's quotes from the movie, if it's, favorite scenes, all that stuff, it lives on somehow. So how does it play into, say, the memory and then certainly the mythology?
Well, I think memory memorialization, so just being a historian from my perspective, is that after the war, I think people needed to get on with their own lives. And then you get to sort of the 50s, maybe into the 60s, and people were still, a lot of the veterans associations and what have you were quite strong there. You had a lot of veterans going back. Then we go into the 70s, and the 70s, of course, for the Americans, you've got the Vietnam Wars going on, or late 60s, early 70s. And you have the start of, the nuclear and all that. And I think memorialization as a whole takes a massive downturn in the 70s and almost fizzles out. But then we go into the 80s and 90s, and it starts to take an upward turn. I think it follows the social history of what's happening globally, if that makes sense. But we go into the 80s and 90s, and it starts to take an upward trend again. And I think that is because you get to the 90s and we're getting to sort of the 90th anniversary of the Great War. And then we get to the 100th anniversary of the Great War, and everything goes up a scale a bit more because we're at that, you know, point in time, 100 years since the Great War. We've lost or have virtually. I think at the 100th anniversary, we might have still have had, or would we have had? No, we wouldn't have had. There were no veterans left at the 100th. It's when the veterans start dying off, I think people start to sort of think, you know, this is no longer living history. This now becomes history. And I also think the other thing that has really changed the way we look at history is media. You know, the advent of the internet. So internet opens up so much to people who can't get down to archives. Suddenly you've got ancestry.com. Suddenly you've got television. Certainly in the UK, we've got programs like Who Do You Think You Are? And people can actually look up their relatives, their ancestors, from the comfort of your own home. And that makes it much, much more accessible. And I think there is a big upward turn in memorialization because of that, literally because of that. Then we hit sort of the 21st century, and we had that horrible period of COVID, which we all remember. And we were, for those people like me, our livelihood just kind of went out of the window overnight. But that created things like virtual touring, and the We Have Ways came about because we were all sat at home watching podcasts and history, and people going online and saying, this is what I do on the battlefield, let me show you it on the internet. That has grown this massive, massive following. Social media, Facebook, X, as it is now called, Instagram, all of that has created a massive following. So I think
that's how we discovered you and your work was through Twitter, you know. So
exactly. And I've made, to be honest, I've made loads of friends that have now become very good friends via the social media platforms. And I think used in the right way, they can be an absolutely brilliant tool, especially for people who don't have the capacity or the wealth to get out onto the battlefields. I mean, that's what we did through COVID, virtual tours. And suddenly that was opened up to people who couldn't get there, not because of not only because of COVID, because they don't have the monetary, it's not feasible from a monetary or a health perspective. So
just being physically unable to do it.
Yeah. Film wise, I can't exactly remember the question about the film, but certainly for me personally, from a film perspective, I think A Bridge Too Far is my favorite 70s war film.
You're in
but
good
but it is a dramatization of actual events. And I think we all have to remember at the time it was made using American money, and it was made for an American audience. And
which is interesting because the American scenes are the worst in the movie and the acting is the worst in the movie.
It's a double-edged sword, really, isn't it? You look at it, and I will, you know, on a rainy Saturday afternoon, I think, got nothing to do. I'll watch A Bridge Too Far, and I watch it. But if I'm watching it with people I know who guide alongside me and do the Arnhem battlefields, all of us will go, well, that's not right. That wouldn't have happened. So you have to watch it within the parameters it's made. It's a dramatization. It's not a bad one. And from a chronological perspective, it is the only film at the moment that takes you right the way through from the start point at Joe's Bridge, all the way up, looking at the different airborne sectors and also looking at the ground forces. I love Theirs Is the Glory because it's that brilliant 46 clipped British English accent, but I also like it because many of the actors play themselves. And I just think it's a fantastic film. It takes you, you could almost be there. But both films, I think, have to be viewed differently because they are entirely different films.
Mm-hmm. How do they kind of play with the understanding? I mean, you're out there on the tour, and you're giving a tour to somebody whose entire basis of knowledge for Market Garden is the movie, and you're sitting there talking about Julian Cook crossing over the Vol River, and they go, and that's when he took his rifle and he started praying the rosary as he went across, and it was Robert Redford and not Julian Cook, right?
Yeah.
I
can think of one particular tour I took out in May this year. Fantastic group of passengers. All 4 of them were male, which is not a problem. But I kept having to sort of like remind them that actually this is what really happened, because I would tell the story and I'd get, well, that didn't happen in the film, did it? Well, no, the film is a dramatization. And it sometimes makes it doubly difficult, and it shouldn't at all, but because I'm a female, especially sometimes if you talk to more so I think the older generation, it's okay, so you're a female, you should be possibly at home doing the ironing or something. What are you out doing here? And gradually, you bring them around to your way of thinking. That comes with experience as a guide. But yeah, quite often I have to say, right, okay, a bridge too far. Take that cassette out and put this new cassette blank into your head. But it's good. You can use the film to refer to it, and you can use, sometimes you can use the film, things that are wrong in the film, to refer to it. So the one real thing that I use is in the film, you've got a company's commander is a guy called Major Tatum Water. In the film, he's the guy that carries the umbrella, but he never makes an attempt to cross the bridge when they first get there to the south side. That's Lieutenant Greyburn. So the character that has been is depicted in the film A Bridge Too Far is kind of a morph of Lieutenant Greyburn and Major Tatum Water.
Yeah, so thus he becomes Major Carlisle instead, and
yes,
gets
all
his
that
own.
kind of, all those kind of things. So you can use the film to your advantage as well, because you can say to people, okay, this is the bit in the film, if you've all watched Bridge Too Far, where this happens. However, it doesn't quite happen like that. It happened like this. But they can relate to that, because virtually everybody you've taken on the battlefield has seen the film. And funnily enough, when you're on the battlefield, and I said it only yesterday, I don't think we were talking actually about Market Garden. We were talking about Band of Brothers, and we were talking about the guy, Babe Heffron's, his character, and we were saying about something that the drama made about 101st in episode 3, Replacements. They were meant to get into, you see them fighting in Noonan, and they never got into Noonan, the town itself. They were fighting on the outskirts. And both myself and my partner Ed said to our passengers, "You're going to go home and watch it now, aren't they?" And they were like, "Yes, of course we are." So yeah, you can use it. You can use them, but I think I would always use them with the caveat they are a dramatization.
That's the thing about our disciplines, that really anybody can do it. And the good news is,
some of us are just foolish enough to get degrees.
You're right. Just foolish enough. And there's nothing more that historians love to do than to pick apart a historical movie. As we've seen with Ridley Scott's Napoleon. I don't think I've ever seen the historical community come together quite literally crucify a man upside down, forgetting a lot of the finer points about Napoleon, arguably one of the most well-recorded people in history. And Ridley Scott's answer to all of this is, well, you weren't there. And it's like, okay, but listen, there's this whole concept called historiography. It's a crazy concept. It's just invented so I can understand how you missed it. But it's stuff like that, though, I think that can actually get people, involved, interested, because how many people if at least one person, goes on these social media websites and they see historians coming together to, absolutely lambast Ridley Scott,
Yeah.
and if one person got interested, in the polling from that, then it's a win for our discipline. Same thing with Market Garden, and a bridge too far, sure, they may get a couple nitpicky things wrong, but if it gets people interested, isn't that the whole point?
Yeah, exactly. And you do get a lot of people who are going, well, this wasn't what happened, this didn't happen. And we do it on the ground as well. But you're exactly right, because it does get people talking. And I think also the other big thing, certainly with us Brits, is we love a failure. We never talk about our successes. We just love a failure.
Yeah. Rob Lyman makes that point in his book, Victory to Defeat. And he says, the British would much rather talk about the Somme than they would talk about winning the First World War.
Definitely. We're just suckers for a failure.
Now, Bo, I think this is a good time to go into Boohickey, because I think we set this up. We've teed it up just right for you.
That's right. And the thing is that we've already done a little bit of Boohickey busting already. But Joe, what is one big thing about Market Garden that people either A, have gotten completely wrong, or there's something that's just blown way out of proportion that you want to dispel?
So I think the thing I would like to dispel and is the fact that when Sergeant Robinson's tank gets to the end of Nijmegen Bridge, we didn't literally stop to make tea. That's a myth.
Robert Redford said.
Yes, that's a myth I would like to bust. Certainly, the 30 Corps did stop there. Every army, when you stop anyway, you stop. You try and get what sleep you can, because you're not going to be getting sleep. Some of the guys will brew up because suddenly you've stopped, nothing's happening. Put the kettle on, but. Why we stopped was, I believe, Sergeant Robinson's tank had about 1 or 2 rounds left in it. We had no forward air cover. The Grenadier Guards, our Grenadier Guards infantry, which fight alongside their tanks, so infantry and tanks fight together. The infantry are still fighting back at Nijmegen. So the tanks are forward across the bridge. They have no infantry with them. And the rebutt from that would be the Americans. Well, the Americans offered to fight with the tanks. That's all well and good, but you're not working on the same communication networks. Right. You've not trained with our tanks.
Yep.
So there was a whole host of reasons why the British stopped at Nijmegen Bridge, and it's dark. We don't fight if you look at the whole of Market Garden, a lot of fighting or movement doesn't happen in the darkness. All these factors come into play, but it's not simply the reason that we stopped to make tea. We might have stopped, somebody might have put a brew on, but there were lots of reasons why we stopped. That's the myth I'd like to bust.
There's nothing wrong with putting a brew on. I mean, and actually, I just read that in James Holland's Brothers in Arms, his history of the Sherwood Rangers. He's always talked about it. It's like, well, after they had fought at Geilenkirchen, they stopped and they made tea, and then they stopped and they made tea, and then they advanced a little bit. They fired a few, and then they made tea. And his point is that it was almost therapeutic, because it's something. You're not in combat anymore. Bullets aren't flying at you, but you need something to come down from that on. You can't just simply turn it on and turn it back off.
Okay.
So you have to do something.
Or you grab a power nap, and the British Army is still taught that today. If you stop and you're going to be stopped for a while, try and get some sleep, because you don't know when your next sleep is going to come from.
Yeah.
And sleep naturally re-energizes the body. And these are men that have been fighting hard and for a number of hours, and soldiers will do that. That's the way you're taught. If you can get 10 minutes, get 10 minutes. Sorry, the lights have just gone off here. They're on a sensor, and I'm not tall enough for the sensor to go on.
You haven't lived until that's happened to you in a bathroom, and all of a sudden there you are in the dark. Yeah.
Yes. So that's I've no doubt that some soldiers would have made tea. I would have been one of them, because this is an armored column as well. 20,000 vehicles. Some of them still back down in wherever, still coming through Eindhoven when we're at Nijmegen Bridge. So everything is backed up.
Yeah. World's longest traffic jam.
Yeah.
Bo, let's go with this one. What's in your cup? I know it's an early morning recording for us, and we haven't been.
So it's 6 o'clock here in the evening. It's not 6 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning. So I'm having a gin and tonic.
Nice. That's
in great company.
Yeah.
Now I have to ask, Joe, what kind of gin is it?
It's actually it's a Scottish gin. It's Edinburgh. I think it's orange and basil gin with slimline tonic.
Okay.
From Edinburgh.
Actually, I'm off to go to Port Royal Liquors this afternoon to go pick up a bottle of Pimm's that I ordered for Pimm's cups for the rest of the summer. So
yeah, it's so hot and humid here.
Yeah,
it's so hot and humid here that and gin and tonic it's an excuse, I know, but a gin and tonic is refreshing.
Well, as long as you're drinking with friends, you don't need an excuse. If you do it by yourself, you might want to check on yourself, I guess.
Yes.
But Joey, man, what is in your brewing cup over there?
Javalia morning breakfast blend, because it's too early yet.
I'm of the persuasion, and as someone who was born and raised here in South Louisiana, we have this saying that as long as or any drink that's consumed before noon doesn't count. That's fair. That being said, I have a little bit of bourbon cream that I've placed in my coffee, so it's I don't seem like so much of an alcoholic, but at least I'm functioning.
There you go.
Go to meetings. Yeah.
Well, you know what it is time for, because we haven't done it yet so far this show. It's time to announce that Homebrew History is in fact brought to you by Civil War Trails, world's largest outdoor museum. Get out there and make some history of your own. And while you're out there exploring that large museum and venturing down the highways of Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, make sure to stop and grab yourself a selfie with one of their wonderful many, many signs. All that beautiful brown powder coat, that wonderful sense, all the images, the maps, everything. Make sure that you get yourself a selfie in front of it. Use the hashtag sign selfie and tag Civil War Trails on social media so that more people than just you and I can hit the trails next time. Use them to plan your vacation. Use them to plan your way home from that awful trip to go see family members that you don't like, or that business trip you didn't want to go to. Make sure that you bring Civil War Trails with you out on the road. Look at that. It's almost like I do this professionally or something. I don't know.
Almost like it.
It's almost like that. Joe, this has been great. Thank you. And I hope, I'm putting cart before the horse here. I'm hoping that the other recordings go well enough. If you've enjoyed this series that we've done on Market Garden, will do, please let us know. And let us know what you want us to talk about next time we do one of these big series. And then suggestions on who we can bring on. And Joe, this was a wonderful way to start off and a wonderful way to finish this series all at the same time.
I was going to say, you've set the bar pretty high for everybody else.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. And likewise, it's been lovely to be on your show. And thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a great hour talking to you.
I was going to say, anytime, and be careful what you wish for, because you might just be back for round 2.
You might.
That's fine.
It's happened. And just ask Peter Caddick Adams. He's on like round 6. Poor man. He can't seem to get away.
Well, no, it would be a pleasure. It would be a pleasure.
Well, Joe, this has been great. Thank you so much. And thanks, everybody, for listening and watching.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you.